Hi, my name is Lena Augustinson.
And I'm Naomi Clifford, and we'd like to welcome you to this edition of the Door History Podcast.
The door. 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 The door.
In this episode, Naomi, Clifford and I will look at a particular stretch of road in Lambeth, together with local historian Tracey Gregory. Using one street, we will explore how women could make a living about 150 years ago, and we start our exploration at a noisy street corner. Naomi, Clifford and I are standing here with Tracey Gregory outside her home on Loughborough Road. We are going down the road to have a look at the various shop fronts. Tell us a little bit about this road. Let's move back about 150 years. What would we see?
So actually the houses that you see today here on this north bit of Loughborough Road are pretty similar to what they would have looked like 150 years ago. Not much change in the physical aspects of the buildings themselves. They've still got the steps up to the front door on the raised ground floor. The front walls are a little bit different, and there's probably the trees are slightly larger than they would have been sort of 150 or even 130 years ago. But otherwise, this end of the street is quite similar.
Used as a hotel, and the actual shop fronts. Could you tell me a little bit about the first one that we're getting to?
So coming up to what was number 60, where Emma Armstrong ran her collar dresses, is now actually number 72 because the street was renumbered several times, and it's now the Megabyte Pizza and Waffle Shop. But I've never actually seen it open. But anyway, so Emma would have run her collar dresser business from downstairs, and then upstairs she would have lived with herself and occasionally Walter, her husband, but her daughter and son and their family.
We're making what we are calling a respectable living in the 19th and 20th century. Could you explore that a bit about what do we mean by respectable?
Yes, it's a very important word, respectable. And if you were not respectable, you really found it difficult to make your way through your social life, if you like. Respectable meant ordered, no sexual doubt about you. So you would be married or single. You would not have any sort of chaotic personal life. So you wouldn't have any illegitimate children, for instance, and you would be known to be, if you were young, to be good. Respectability really was a word that clung to women particularly. Men could be respectable and have a few transgressions, but women really had to be well behaved.
So in terms of work, when we are in this episode of The Door, we're going to talk about women who had respectable work. So we are not going to talk about certain areas of work.
No, you certainly would. We won't be talking about sex work, which is a whole separate subject, nor are we really covering today domestic work. Because although many domestic workers were entirely respectable, that again is a huge area which we're just not going to cover today.
Yeah, so we are actually looking at women who particularly worked from home rather than going out to work in this episode, I think.
Yes, indeed. I mean, how women used their homes for their work and had a respectable presentation to the world.
And you, Tracey, of course, know this area that we are going to talk about, which is Loughborough Road. And could you just tell me a little bit about, this particular area at that time, and what type of people would live here?
Yes, at the sort of turn of the 19th and 20th century, the area was quite respectable, using that word again. In a Booth, who, along with an army of people, mapped the wealth and poverty of London, chose or selected and found that on Loughborough Road it was a respectable area. People were fairly well off. They were mainly tradespeople, obviously. The employment of the men primarily designated the wealth of the family. But along Loughborough Road, all the houses were red, which meant that they were fairly well off. And tradespeople, clerks in the city working for importers and exporters in all sorts of commercial trades, from textiles to food products and that sort of thing. Of course, there were a lot of entertainers as well, but I think that's another episode in itself, because there were a lot of people making a living from the entertainment industry, particularly women in this area as well.
But that is interesting, and I think that should be another episode. And it was just to mention, is that because how it's located within London?
Yes, we've looked at that. There's no sort of definitive reason as to why people located themselves here, but we think it is, because there was easy access into the West End, particularly with the tram network. As the area developed, there were already quite a lot of entertainers living in Kennington, and so as the area developed, the more well-off entertainers really moved into and took over some of the properties here. So there was the trams running from the White Horse, which is a very popular pub, and then of course there was the train networks as well, which could get these entertainers to the main station so that they could then travel all over the country to go and perform. So. And then, people cluster through different industries, so all the services developed for the entertainers in this area as well.
Yeah, I think that would be so interesting to look at some point. But now we're looking at the women who were residing in this area and working. Naomi, you were...
Well, I was just going to say, we think of Brixton, just going back a little bit, we think of Brixton as very urban now, as inner city, but actually at the time it was suburban. It was outside what was thought of as London, and Brixton is technically in Surrey, so it was really thought of as a step, as we might consider some of the further suburbs that are outside London now.
Yeah, it
was then regarded as quite far away and outside the mainstream.
So now when we're looking at more specific examples of women who worked in the area, would you say it was fairly typical, Tracey?
Yes, I think so. I haven't looked in detail at any other area, but the way that Loughborough Road and the Brixton area developed is quite similar to the way that North London developed, particularly. East London is slightly different. But, that expansion of the city, as Naomi has said, the suburbs developing, if you like, and particularly, away from the East End and the Thames, quite middle-class suburbs. So I think that Loughborough Road, and where I've looked, seems to be fairly typical of other areas and the way they've developed and the type of people that live there.
And the type of work they would do and how they would gain income. And of course, it wasn't so easy for women to actually have an independent income. And first of all, what type of women would need to have an income, and what type of women would it be? Divorced or widows? Or
well, divorce was very difficult to get, even at the end of the 19th century. Before the Matrimonial Causes Act in 1857, it was practically impossible, and a woman couldn't initiate it. There were only about 10 divorces a year at that time, and they had to each go through Parliament. An Act of Parliament had to be. So it was only for the mega rich and very rare. Even after that Act of Parliament in the mid-19th century, it was incredibly difficult to get a divorce, and there were still very few of them, because first thing, you had to be in open court and give your evidence in open court, so your scandalous life would be laid bare for the public. A man could divorce a wife for one act of adultery. A woman could not divorce her husband unless he was adulterous plus one other thing. So that might be violence, rape in the marriage. It might be the marriage was incestuous, or what they called bestial, which is probably not something we want to discuss today. But she had to show an extra thing, an extra aspect. So incredibly difficult to get a divorce. So a lot of people presented themselves as widowed if they had separated from their husbands and lived a very respectable life as a widow, hoping never ever to clap eyes on their ex again. So those people, even though they'd had some chaos in their earlier life, could just lie and say they're widows. If you go to the census, there are many women there described as widows who are definitely not.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That is...
It's a very... I mean, why wouldn't you do that, you know?
Yeah.
You wouldn't describe yourself as divorced at that time or separated.
Yeah, so there were women who were separated as well,
Yeah.
I guess. So would they be a Mrs. then, but they would just like...
Oh,
the
absolutely.
man would not be present.
Well, if they were... I suppose if they stayed in their area, the neighbours would know exactly what had happened. Or if they were new to the area, they might say they were widowed.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people just saw that sort of just at the end of a marriage as a sad thing. If the man was terrible, they'd be very sympathetic and they'd just sort of ignore it.
And then, of course, there must be women who never got married.
Yes. And I think I'm right population at this time. So there would always be a number of unmarried women many of whom did not have a great deal of resource, and would have to think about how to make a living.
And also, even within a family unit, sometimes some of the older girls, if still living with parents, they would also be working as well to try and supplement the income and carve a career of their own. Particularly if they were a little bit, when I've looked at, there are some younger women, but particularly sort of older women still living at home in their 30s, because by that point they probably think that they are going to have to, develop a career to look after themselves in the future, because they're probably not going to get married. They may, but they probably won't be. So they've already started working in the home.
And this is something, of course, that is easy to forget now, that the family unit was quite different, generally speaking. Am I right? Well, not really.
I'm not sure what you mean. But...
What I mean is that, for instance, that your elderly parents would live with you, for instance.
Or, absolutely.
Or that,
families,
there would be children of a family who stayed up until they died. They just always lived with their mother or... so that's what I mean.
Absolutely.
So the families...
It was... You wouldn't be expecting to leave home at the age of 21 if you're a woman. You'd expect to stay at home until you were married. And if you were never married, you would be at home. On the other hand, sometimes families would split apart if the father of the family died. And then everyone would have to start looking for an income if they were not well off. And you might find them in all parts of London or the country or abroad, because they're all looking for something to do. And I know it's not entirely relevant, but it came out in a lot of research I did for the First World War, for people's families split after the income provider died. So, but staying in your home, it's central to all of us, isn't it? And using your home economically would make absolute sense.
Yeah,
if you possibly could.
That would have been an asset that a widow with a live or dead husband could do, I guess, because that is a resource. Even though, as I understand it, you didn't really own your home in the same way as we think about it now. You weren't a home owner. There were different methods that were quite complicated, if I'm right.
Yes, there was, particularly on Loughborough Road, for example, there were three sort of landowners, if you like. The Angel family, owned the south side of the street, the Slade family owned the north side of the street, and the Ecclesiastical Commission owned the little row of shops. And then there were leases and subleases, you know, for anything from between 3 years to 96 years. And some of the properties had, you know, 3 sublessees and then a tenant as well. Some were
incredibly complicated.
It is.
Okay.
But some were, in some instances, some people that lived there just leased it from the freeholder. But sometimes there were subleases and then final tenants. So it was quite complicated.
That was quite. Let's not talk too much about that. But the home was even so an asset for someone who had it. Well, however, it
absolutely. And often I think one thing to bear in mind is that these homes were very crowded. They were not large, and you might have your aunt living with you, for instance, and she might have to share a bed with you. Plus, there was a love of furniture. You know, the 18th century, you think of very sparse rooms with very little in them. Well, by the time you get to the end of the 19th century, people love to overstuff their houses. So not a great deal of space in which to, you know, do whatever you're doing.
Yeah. So to run a home, you used a lot of services, didn't you? I sort of understand if even quite modest homes would use various services because the houses couldn't provide them themselves. People didn't have washing machines, obviously, stuff like that. And one of the persons we're going to look at, I think, running... Well, tell me a little bit about this laundrette type of service.
Yes, well, as you say, you know, there was... most of the houses had one domestic servant, a woman in every instance, but there was only one servant, so they had to do everything. So they may have done some washing at home, but on Loughborough Road there was a laundrette run by Emma Armstrong. In fact, it wasn't called a laundrette, it was called a collar dressers. So it's unclear whether Emma and her laundrette collar dressers at number 60, whether she was just literally sort of ironing collars and shirts, starching and ironing to, you know, once the items had been washed. But she may well have been taking in the laundry and then sending it out elsewhere to a bigger laundry service.
Laundry needs a lot of space.
Yes.
It's got big equipment and you need to dry things. So it takes up a lot of real estate. So there were these big industrial city laundries that people made good use of it. So yes, I can imagine people coming along with their bundle, a servant coming along with a bundle and giving it in, and it would be taken off to another place to be laundered.
But certainly there was that sort of pressing service, if you like, you know, and attaching specialist yes. starching of collars and the bibs in shirts that would have been going on in the shops. And as Naomi says, you know, they need a large-scale shop or warehouse to be actually doing the laundry, and that's unlikely to have happened on site on Loughborough Road. But there were actually 2 collar dressers. There was the one that Emma Armstrong ran at number 60, and then almost opposite on the other side of the road there was another laundry service, and that changed. That was there for 90 years, but it changed changed managers and owners over the period of time. But certainly there are adverts in the paper saying that is a delivery drop service, and the laundry service was actually on Southwark Bridge Road. And they had 6 or 7 other drop services where all the laundry was then taken to the main site. They would run vans.
And what do we know about Emma?
So Emma was married to a man called Walter Armstrong, and actually the collar dressers business was registered in Walter's name for the first 10 years. But it's very unlikely that he was actually anything to do with the collar dressers, because he's also variously registered as a car man and a tea seller, but his main line of business was actually as a wrestler and a sports correspondent. And Emma and Walter seem to have separated after about 10 years on Loughborough Road, and Walter got involved in all sorts of altercations with the law, etc. They did remain married because she never identified herself as a widow, but they clearly weren't living together. And so Emma continued to run the business with her son and daughter living with her. until at least 1912, well into her 70s. She's still registered in the directories as running the collar dressers. Amazing. So she is making a living, probably subsidising her husband, because she does turn up in court to support him. So she's probably the one actually making the money and helping to support her husband in his various antics that he gets up to.
Amazing.
Wow. And in the other laundry service over the road, that's mainly registered in the name of men. They are the business owners, if you like. But living above the laundrette is usually a family headed by a woman that is managing the laundry. So even though, again, the business is not necessarily related to the person that owns the laundry business, but the woman is living above with her family running the laundry service.
So with this laundrette or drop-off type of laundrette, would it have a shop front, do you think? Or would it be just like a door where you knock and you give your...
No, it definitely had a shop front, because there are a couple of postcards from about sort of 1905, 1908, and the ones that are actually photographs, you can zoom in just about, and you can see the sort of graininess of the shirts hung up in the window,
fantastic.
All that sort of thing. So they're advertising what they're doing by the products that they're selling in the window. It's not a sort of closed shop.
And did it have a lot of shops on Loughborough Road?
Yes, there's a little row. So there's a row of houses, and then there's about sort of 10 shops on either side of the road as you get up to the Five Ways junction. So that's a row there. And then there were a few shops opposite the White Horse pub on the corner of Brixton Road as well, but they were demolished in the 70s. But those little shops on the beginning of Loughborough Road were sort of connected to the little shopping district, if you like, on Brixton Road itself and going into Robsart Street. But it was very much, serving the expanding residential area, those little shops on Loughborough Road going up to Five Ways.
Yeah, so obviously the laundrette is a type of shop. Were there other shops that women might run? Or?
Yes, I mean, there were other women definitely at the late 19th, early 20th century running shops. There was Emma Jenkins. She ran a stationery shop from about 1880. Her husband set up the stationery shop when they moved in when they first got married, but sadly he died after about 3 years, and Emma took it on in her 20s. And continued to run the shop for the next 45 years.
Oh, wow.
And then it remained as Jenkins.
And did she live above the shop then?
She lived above the shop the whole time with her family, and her sister came and helped her, work in the shop. And there are shop assistants living with her in the flat above the shop as well. And then there's a Mrs. Dale who ran a boot shop, Eliza Dale, and her husband died. He was the original boot maker. And she took over the business and ran it for about 13 years after he died as well. So, there's women who clearly are taking over their husbands' businesses. But then in the case of Emma Armstrong, I believe she set the business up and it just happened to be in her husband's name to start with. And maybe they were joint owners, the husband and wife setting up the business. It's hard to tell, really, without the documentary evidence, we don't know for sure. But it was certainly a way for women on Loughborough Road to make a decent living running these shops and living above the shop and having the assistants living with them, or having family working with them. But they were leading these businesses.
And would people like the Emmas would they have other sources of income, do you think?
Yes, it seems, particularly with Emma Jenkins, I think she had a slightly larger a flat, that they took in boarders as well that didn't seem to actually be working in the shop. They may have been working in other shops, they seem to be, a tobacconist or something like that, assistant. So they seem to have taken in lodgers as well to sort of supplement that income.
Yeah. So using your home as a landlady was not uncommon?
No, definitely not. Even not the shop owners, the other houses on the street, there were definitely women, heads of houses that were taking in boarders. There's only one house sort of in the 1901 census that's actually designated as a boarding house, but many of the others clearly have boarders that are living with them. Many have, extended family members, other, widowed sisters and their children or brothers or things like that, but then also bringing in other boarders as well.
It's a sort of classic situation, isn't it? And, you know, when you think of boarding houses, you don't think of the landlord, you think of the landlady of the boarding house. It's, you know, it is a sort of, I suppose, the first go-to source of income, that you've got, you know, you've got rooms, you make them produce money for you. And I suppose all you need to do then is make sure that you can feed these people. So you might hire a servant to prepare the food, but it is the classic and most obvious.
Yeah.
And they're not always single people either.
No.
You know, sometimes they are young couples,
Yes.
or you know, a couple with a child as well. So it's not just a house full of single boarders. It's different, you know, makeups of
Yes.
family.
Oh, I
groups
see.
in the house.
And what was it quite hard to find housing? You know.
Well, I think, you know, people were still coming to London. You know, London expanded hugely from the 1850s, and of course this area was built, you know, between the 1860s and 1870s, and a lot of people were moving from elsewhere in London, from elsewhere in the country, from all over the empire, as it were, you know, coming to London to find work.
Yes, absolutely. And if you look at the amount of Victorian housing we have, even despite clearances, despite the Blitz, everything, there is so much. And that everyone was building. For years and years, everyone was building houses. It's great speculative business, isn't it? And often it would not make the builders money. Often they were very badly built. But it was development everywhere. Yeah.
And there was demand. I mean, they were meeting
absolutely,
a demand because you know London, everyone was coming into London.
It was overspilling.
To make a living in various different ways. So
these were all very respectable type of occupation: shopkeeper, laundrette. What else have we said?
Boarding landladies.
Boarding landlady.
Yes.
What other avenues were there for ladies to make an income within their home?
Music teachers. There's quite a few music teachers, and so people, you know, would probably have a piano. Naomi's already mentioned the furniture, so you probably have a piano anyway, and you know, quite a lot of singing and events going on in the community hall. So you would have grown up singing within the family, learning to play the piano. So women, you know, there's several music teachers. Quite unusually, I think, on Loughborough Road as well. In our research, we've come across this wonderful woman called Nellie Roberts, who made a living as an orchid artist. So not just a botanical artist, but specifically painting orchids. And she was taken on as the first orchid artist for the Royal Horticultural Society in 1897, and she continued for them for over 56 years. So she made a living from painting orchids, not just for the RHS, but for the North of England Orchid Society and for private collectors as well. And certainly later in her life, she was earning money to look after her sister as well, who was in the 1939 census, obviously later in the period we're talking about, but was, you know, designated as incapacitated. So we don't know how long her sister
So she had a dependent, and
Yeah.
she never married herself, did she?
No, she didn't.
But she had this amazingly long career where she was really top of her tree, wasn't she? She was the best.
Yes, she was. And, you know, she's been under-recognised. And I like to think that some of the work that we've been doing, we've just unveiled a plaque on her unmarked grave. We're running a campaign for a blue plaque on her house. And actually the RHS itself have just published a book on orchid illustrations. I haven't got a copy, it's literally just been published, but someone has informed me that actually in this book is the first time that Nellie is really credited for the exquisite work that she has done. So so she made a living as an artist, and she lived on Loughborough Road.
Yeah, so Nellie is actually taking us into a more living memory. And women can make a living now, respectfully or not. It's easier. Saying that, I think it's also quite interesting to look back at, you know, for instance, with lodgings and stuff like that, still many landladies around, you know, making the most of what you can. I think it's interesting, isn't
Well,
it?
both you and I have, Lena, have done that, haven't we?
Well, yes,
We let
indeed.
our rooms get an income at a particular point. So, yes, I mean, it's still a thing.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking about sort of the rights of women and what they were allowed to do, and living memory. And certainly, I remember when I was a child that my mother, for instance, couldn't take out a loan or buy something on hire purchase without the signature of my father. So running your own financial affairs was, up until recent history, a little bit of a problem if you were a woman. And I'm just thinking about the issues for the women that Tracey has just mentioned. Coming up against leases and things that address you as a man only. And I think you've mentioned that you found one where the Mr. had been struck out, and is that, am I remembering that right?
Well, there's definitely sort of cases where leases have been awarded to the husband, and then the husband has seemingly passed away, and so things have been altered, and then the lease does go into the woman's name. But how that happened, like legally, I don't know. And as with all these amazing women that made a living, well, this is before women had the vote. As you say, they couldn't sign documents, so I don't know, particularly those that are widowed, whether they're separated or not, who they got to sign the documents to actually be able to register their business and all that sort of thing is it's a bit unclear,
and a lot of these
really.
pre-printed documents were designed for men.
Yes.
So and that
So it's an interesting further line of inquiry,
yes.
but they clearly are, making a very I don't know about very decent, but in the directories, for example, in the Kelly's directories, you can see that they are the heads of the business, and that's sort of one area where they could register their business and promote their business. But legal documents, I'm not so sure.
And also, I mean, they were not seen as particularly unusual. They were a big part of the landscape, and perhaps a landscape that, their part in it has been forgotten, just like Nellie Roberts, the beautiful artistry that she produced, the artworks that she produced, not given the recognition that she should have done. But equally, the laundresses and the sort of more ordinary business keepers and business women, they don't pop up in our imagination in the way that the Victorian shopkeeper does. We've all seen those tableau, those photographs of butchers outside their shop fronts with all the butchers' assistants. I mean, maybe that's not a very good example, butchery, but other shop businesses.
Yeah.
We don't think of a woman in charge of that. We always think Victorian shopkeepers, they're men.
Yeah.
So I think it's time we recognised this huge contribution to the economy and to where we are now by women.
And that's what we're trying to do a little bit on Loughborough Road,
I
telling women's stories.
I think we should mention that Tracey has produced a fantastic book with the help of the Brixton Society, I think.
That's right.
Could you just give us the details for that, Tracey?
Yes, it's called Loughborough Road Histories.
And does it have your name on it, Tracey Gregory?
It does, yes. And it's actually volume 1, amazingly enough. That's probably a bit over ambitious, but and it does contain small stories. So, for example, one of the things that I look at is a postcard from 1905 and go along and describe very quickly what the businesses are and who's running those businesses in that photograph in the postcards. And there's also a short history of Nellie Roberts and a couple of the other businesses as well. And as I gather more stories, maybe one day I'll publish volume 2.
Okay,
and
it's available that from the Brixton Society?
From the Brixton Society and the Brixton Society's page on eBay.
Thank you, Tracey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Door podcast. Please like us on social media, Twitter or Instagram at The Door podcast, or
subscribe to us. You'll find all our various platforms on our website. thedoorpodcast.com. That's all from us. See you next time.
Bye.